My name is Rashmi Varma, and I'm the Managing Director of Innovate 5G. I want to tell you a little bit about what Innovate 5G is all about. Can we put the slides on? So Innovate 5G is actually a first of its kind. It's an accelerator, and we are here to bring 5G-driven business growth. We are trying to build an advocacy. We are trying to focus on 5G disruptive technologies, the adoption initiatives, and 5G applications. So if you are in the market building something that requires 5G attributes, low latency, high bandwidth, and high number of connections, then you ought to come see us. We are, as part of an accelerator, we are actually more focused within sectors of health, well-being, and fitness, transportation, and entertainment. So if you have something that's going on in that area, we will definitely be interested in talking to you. As part of this initiative, next slide. So we all know, as far as 5G is concerned, we are behind. As far as, if you look at 5G deployment worldwide, China is obviously way ahead of us, and we are still actually trying to keep up with our 5G deployment, mainly because of some of our issues are regarding the spectrum availability for 5G, which we'll talk about a little bit today. Because of the lack of mid-band spectrum, we are actually left to work with millimeter wave, which is not very conducive, and we'll talk more about this. But mainly, we are trying to make sure that we have enough resources for experimentation. Basically, allow people to bring in their ideas and try it out. To make that happen, we are actually trying to work on trainings. We're trying to work on events like this, bringing information to you all. We are trying to actually set up a 5G network testbed and set up a developer ecosystem for it. Also, we'll talk about the US-India proposal in a little bit, but can I go to the next slide, please? So as part of the solution, obviously we are looking to host a network, an experimental 5G test network, and incubate developers over this platform. So that would be the first 5G experimental network to develop, prototype, test, and demonstrate new products and services. And to do this, we are actually building a big consortium of companies are coming together. We are looking to build the first neutral 5G test bed, which would be multi-vendor. And we are trying to bring together several entities from the government, the academia, as well as the companies. You'll meet some of the speakers from some of these companies here. So it's actually a big effort that we are trying to put together for this. But we know that this consortium is going to come together. We already have several folks that have signed in with MOUs. So as part of the accelerator, basically that's what we do. We mentor, we provide validation. You can test on our testbed, funding as well as network to take you to market. And as far as MOUs are concerned, we actually have a tie-up with Prime Minister Narendra Modi's accelerator in India, iCreate, that we are also working with India on some of these 5G initiatives. So this is truly an international accelerator. It's not just here in North America, but we are more focused on trying to bring 5G applications out to the entire world. And we are working very closely with India on this aspect. So that's about Innovate 5G. I would actually like to invite someone here who would actually be able to give us more information about what we are going to be talking today. Mainly, we're going to talk about there's a new spectrum that has been released by the FCC that actually is quite a game changer. I did talk about the lack of mid-band spectrum there, but with what has been released from the FCC, there is a whole slew of opportunities that have opened up for us, and that's why we put this event together. And I would like to invite Alan Ewing from CBRS Alliance to come and give us an introduction here. Alan is the Executive Director of CBRS Alliance, and I'll let him make a little bit of an introduction for himself here.
So good afternoon, everyone. As Rashmi kindly introduced me, I'm Alan Ewing, the Executive Director of CBRS Alliance. So what I'll be telling you about is hopefully helping set the stage for some of the conversation that you'll see here in a little while, giving you a little bit of ground information so that you have some understanding of the concepts about this thing we refer to as OnGo. So OnGo is a brand name, and I'll be referring to it extensively. So if you're familiar, of course, with Wi-Fi, Wi-Fi is a brand name that's associated with 802.11, the IEEE spec, 802.11, and all of its iterations, and it's known as the brand name Wi-Fi. So you can think of OnGo in a very similar way. OnGo is a brand name for the deployment of particularly LTE spectrum, or LTE technology, in the 3.5 gigahertz spectrum that we'll show you here in just a moment. So what is this stuff? And is the, no. There we go. So a little bit about what I'll tell you today is OnGo defined. I'll give you a brief history of CBRS, and when I say brief, I mean extremely brief history. What is the real estate of telecommunications? The spectrum concept, or the idea of spectrum. Spectrum holdings, why the spectrum is shared, and how the spectrum is shared, and then some of the very basic building blocks behind that that make the spectrum sharing work in this particular instance. And then finally, what we refer to as realizing the vision. So, simply put, OnGo is an opportunity for innovation. Okay, that's nice marketing speak, but it is private LTE, which means this is outside of the carrier world, outside of the T-Mobile Sprint world. Anyone can deploy potentially a private LTE network. That's the idea behind this, to allow folks to innovate, to do things they've never been able to do before. It is in a dedicated frequency band. So this 3.5 gigahertz band that we refer to as the CBRS band, and it is supported through advanced spectrum sharing technology. So this whole fundamental idea, however, in the day that this concept was really put forward, the idea of the innovation band was part of the discussion. So this opportunity for innovation is really what we're building upon. So, forgive me, Professor Hawking, brief history of CBRS from shared spectrum to private LTE. Well, maybe better if we put in the godfather of CBRS, and he's the one that's laughing down here, and you'll get to hear more from him in a little while, Mr. Chris Stark. So, what is this? 2010, the brief history begins. 3.5 gigahertz is identified for possible shared use. 2013, Citizens Broadband Radio Service. That is what the acronym CBRS stands for, as defined by the FCC. And then finally, 2016, the CBRS Alliance was formed to support the deployment of private LTE in the CBRS band. CBRS Alliance, whom I'm representing today, is an industry association. Industry associations are comprised of member companies. Right now, we are 152 member companies. A lot of names to recognize, all the major carriers, a lot of the big infrastructure vendors like Nokia and Ericsson, a lot of the cable operators, Cox, Charter, etc. So these kinds of companies have all come together to make the most out of this innovation band. So, spectrum, one way to think about spectrum is it is the real estate of telecommunications. So there are all of these different bands that are identified and utilized in different, for different operators, and in some cases even for different technologies. What I've tried to do here for you is represent that there is spectrum all over the place. This real estate is owned by different players. You see the major operators in particular. But in the middle, you see, under CBRS, anybody can play the game. And that's really what this is all about, is opening up spectrum for the use of anybody to innovate. Uh-oh. It's a little help. That may have been on me, guys. So this is not anything to do with. That's all right. It may have been on me, guys. So. And a quick review of Rashmi's presentation for you. Just to keep that in mind. And we need to see Chris again.
Yeah.
All right. So back to this idea of real estate. Now, what's the main rule of real estate? Location, location, location. Prime location, 3.5 gigahertz mid-band spectrum is ideal for many different purposes. It's great for in-building, it's great for outdoor applications. So this 3.5 gigahertz spectrum that's been allocated for the CBRS band really is location, location, location. This is prime real estate. Not only that, but one thing to keep in mind here is the major carriers, if you look at the low and mid-band spectrum that they own, the real estate that they own, you see that they each have somewhere between 50 and 150 megahertz of spectrum to AT&T 158. Comparison, CBRS, 150 megahertz of mid-band spectrum available for anyone. Put that into perspective. So the carriers have a nice chunk, and you get services all the time from the carriers. In comparison, 150 megahertz of spectrum available for use is not a trivial matter. This is not one channel or two channels. This is a large tract of real estate for use in innovating and creating innovation in the mid-band. So why is the spectrum shared? Part of that real estate was previously occupied by other players. Those other players are known as incumbents. The incumbents are not trivial incumbents. The big one is the US Navy. So the US Navy utilizes that spectrum even now for carrier landing operations, the radars to allow planes to land on the carrier decks. Also in that spectrum, fixed wireless satellite stations and wireless internet service providers. So there's folks in the real estate that we wish to occupy. As a result, that spectrum needs to be shared. That real estate needs to be shared. What does that require in practice? Is essentially a traffic cop to ensure that both the incumbents, the folks that have been there, and the new players, the on-go players, are able to work together and work together without interfering with one another. So this idea is something that we'll talk about in just a moment and what that traffic cop is. But a little bit more of a technical picture for you, and one that we pull out every so often. The 150 megahertz, you see along that total amount there. The incumbents up at the top, as I mentioned, the military, ship-based radar, ground stations, WISPs, wireless internet service providers, they're always going to have the spectrum if they need it. As the incumbents, they have priority. If the spectrum is not being used by one of the incumbents, then it can be used by on-go deployments. I'm going to skip over the middle tier for the moment, and if we go down to the bottom tier, general authorized access. This essentially means anyone can use it. Anyone can use the spectrum. There are some rules to follow, equipment to deploy, of course, but if you follow those rules and deploy that equipment, you can set up a network. You as an individual can set up a network if you are willing to do the things that are necessary to do it, to invest the money and follow the rules to make it happen. The middle tier is what's known as priority access licenses. The licenses in this space that these gentlemen will talk about a little bit in the following panel that you'll see are the licenses that give you one step up in the priority list. So you aren't getting exclusive use of the spectrum. What you're doing is ensuring that you have access over guys in the GAA world. So if you want to make sure that you have a channel, as long as the military or the other incumbents aren't in play, then the PAL is the way to go. In the big urban counties, they're done by counties. In the big urban counties, this probably makes a lot of sense, is to purchase one of the PALs. And those auctions will take place middle of next year. And I'll leave more of that discussion here to a little bit later. So the traffic cop is known as a SAS. And, oh man. Do not push the bottom button. We're going to get another quick review, I'm afraid. Can you guys dump me in the middle?
Yep, 1 second.
Thank you. That one is operator
Which slide do you want?
just travel down through there to the middle. A couple up from there. That one more down. There you go. This button. Spectrum Access System centrally coordinates access to the shared spectrum. So that idea, this shared access, essentially what the SASs are doing is they're acting as the traffic cop. So they know who the incumbents are, they know where the deployments of your network are geographically. They're able to help make sure that you are not interfering with one of the incumbents or interfering with each other. So very much in that sense, a traffic cop. They're making sure that things are happening smoothly. Another piece of the puzzle is what's known as Environmental Sensing Capability, ESC. This is a set of listening antennas that are looking for the incumbents because the Navy isn't necessarily going to call us up and say, our carriers are here, and by the way, we're going to be recovering airplanes. It's probably not something the Navy is interested in telling us. So we need to be able to dynamically sense that. So when we see the radars come on, we're able to detect that. And when we detect it, the SAS then knows, hey, the Navy needs the spectrum in this location. Everybody else get out of the way, simply put it. And then finally, the base stations, the radios that are actually making, are your network, your innovation network, are known as CBSDs. Because in telecom, the only place it's worse than telecom for acronyms is the military. And so telecom always has to come up with a new acronym for something. So CBSD is the acronym for essentially base station, E node B, if you know that terminology, access point, another way to say the same thing. So, what is all this about? Commercial deployments have actually begun. This isn't a theory, this isn't vaporware, this isn't a good idea anymore. This is real commercial deployment. Middle of September, the FCC said, turn on the lights. We had a big event in Washington, D.C., where one of the FCC commissioners, Commissioner O'Reilly, helped us launch the technology officially for commercial purposes. So this is real. People are making money off of CBRS deployments today. The equipment is widely available. So the infrastructure side, the end user devices, and all the FCC approvals are in place to make this happen. Phones, the flagship phones from the major manufacturers are supporting the CBRS band. If you want to look for that, look for band 48. Band 48 support is the band in question for CBRS. If you look at the specs for a particular phone or device, you'll see band 48. It's ready to go for CBRS. And then finally, to link in to our friends from Innovate 5G, 5G is part of this equation as well. And there's going to be a lot more, I think, elaboration about that in our panel session. But 5G on-go is also already in development. So the discussions and the specifications and the work and the groundwork to make 5G part of this picture as well is already happening. So it's very important, Rashmi also mentioned, we need to, as a nation, stay as current as we can, and mid-band spectrum 5G deployments are part of that strategic vision. So we want to make sure to enable that as much as possible. With that, I say thank you. Have any questions, I'll be around. Also, Rashmi will have, I believe, some of the presentation materials available, and be happy to field any questions after the event. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be careful with this.
Thank you. All right. I think we should go ahead and get our panel up here. I know we have a lot of questions. The first thing that starts out is with all that lingo and jargon that Alan has just thrown out at us. One thing about telecom folks is that we always start out at floor 10. So sometimes we actually have to backtrack. But I'm going to introduce a panel here one by one, and they're going to actually help us peel that onion, unfold what does this mean? What is this all about? Okay, so I want to first introduce Chris Stark. He is the chairman and founder of CBRS Alliance, and as you heard Alan say, the father of CBRS, right? We are very proud to have him here participating with us. I will actually let Chris introduce himself a little bit there.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so first off, I was actually only a grad when we started this, so I don't know how I can be the grandfather or whatever it was. Look, we started the CBRS Alliance was all about trying to enable people to take advantage of an innovation opportunity. And I think one of the hardest things that we've always had to contend with was to try and put it in context for people to just grasp the opportunity and go do something with it. And we sort of continue to try and find ways to reach out to industry, to people just generally at large, so that they understand what the opportunity is here. And I think events like this are really good for us. They help us reach a new set of people. But I think the one thing about all this was we wanted to take away all of the complexity of whether it's 4G, whether it's 5G, modems, you name it, all of the technical pieces. We wanted to take all that away and leave an opportunity for people to just go innovate and do some cool things. And we already have seen that. We've seen people set up cool networks in their own home and things like that. So that's the piece I think I'd like to just start with, is just try to keep that in mind, that whilst it's all, we bring out all of these terms and it's nice and technical and so on, but fundamentally what makes the difference is whether people innovate in it.
Great, thanks Chris. Next we have Jennifer McCarthy. Actually, she's on the phone, remotely connected to us. Jennifer, can you hear us?
I can you hear me?
Oh, wonderful, yes. So Jennifer actually is Vice President Legal at Federated Wireless, and I met her at an event in New York hosted by Wells Fargo, and they did a wonderful job at putting together the information CBRs and a panel, and that's why I was like, Jennifer, you got to be on this, you got to help us navigate this. So Jennifer, welcome. Please, if you could say a few words, please go ahead.
Absolutely, thank you, Rashmi. I apologize for not being there with you in person, but appreciate the opportunity to chat with you all and explore this really exciting opportunity to bring new innovative spectrum allocation and management techniques with new technology and enable a whole bunch of use cases that have been stymied, if you will, due to lack of access to affordable spectrum. Federated Wireless, we are one of the 5 spectrum access system administrators that the FCC and NTIA and the Department of Defense collectively approved to help manage the spectrum in the CBRS band. So we are using our cloud-based automated software capability to help manage interference and between the incumbents that Alan described earlier and the new entrants. We've also deployed a network of sensors along the coasts of the United States that listen for the naval radar ships when they are in operation and get close to shore. And it's that sensing capability that enables the system to recognize when the military wants to get access to the spectrum and to move any of the new users that might be in that geographic area and on that particular channel to a different channel, or lower their power, or do both temporarily while the Navy is using the frequencies. So together, that sensor network and our cloud-based software capability are what's enabling the shared access to the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS band. And we are actively working with a number of these new users. And Rashmi, when you're ready for it, I can go into greater detail about all the different applications and use cases that are being enabled by this spectrum.
Right, great. Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, we will actually have questions about the Federated Wireless SAS, and we'll get to it pretty soon. Let me introduce the next speaker here, Ryan Pettijohn from Fujitsu Network Communications. And thank you, Ryan, for joining us. And I'll let you say a few words as well.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, thanks for joining us. I'm Ryan Pettijohn with Fujitsu. I guess for those who aren't telecom insiders, most people know us best for our camera phone, but that is actually a different company. We're Fujitsu Network Communications. We're just up the road here in Richardson. Been here for about 35 years. We manufacture optical networking equipment, we network orchestration platforms, and we do systems integration. So that's actually the division that I'm out of. We do multi-vendor network systems integration. So we build networks for our customers. So, we feel like with the innovation that's happening in the CBRS space, there's a great opportunity for service providers to help new entrants into telecom do things that they haven't been able to do previously. So that's essentially the perspective I'll be representing.
All right, great. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it. I have next on someone here from Nokia, Alessandro, Vice President Sales, and really, really nice to have you here. Thank you for coming in and being a speaker on a panel on a busy day like this. But I thought given the weather, we are better inside than outside, I guess.
Right.
But thank you. I'll let you say a few words here. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you for inviting me first, and the honor to represent Nokia today at this panel. Nokia is a company with a very wide portfolio, from mobile networks and fixed networks to IP routing, optical, to a bunch of software businesses, from business and operations, software system, to analytics, to cloud and infrastructure management and orchestration. So we also have opened last year a new business group, which is enterprise, as with in order to focus on a dedicated effort to develop more and more business towards enterprise, and especially this is a good momentum, with the new technology coming, which is the 5G. So in particular, my role is I'm representing one of the business groups, which is mobile networks, and I'm even saying it's a strategy and development for Americas. So once again, I'm very honored to be here. And just to give a flavor about what the mobile networks deliver today, you can imagine a city like Boston, and imagine the radio modules that you need to, deliver to enable a cities like Boston. Actually, we deliver one city like Boston every day. So just give you the flavor about the size of the company and the type of business we are in. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alessandro. Thank you for the introduction. And finally, we have Kurt Jacobs from GMA Wireless, here also as a panel speaker. Kurt, take it away.
Hi, thanks for having us today. This is an exciting time, not only on the cusp of 5G, but for what we're doing with CBRS really is the innovation band. GMA Wireless, you probably haven't heard of it. It's not a household name, but we do a lot of radio infrastructure antennas for in-building and stadiums. You have undoubtedly connected through our equipment. It's sold to the carriers and to private enterprises. We're a US-based company. In fact, we have our 5G development here in the Dallas area. And we just announced we're opening a 5G manufacturing in upstate New York, so we're proud about that. CBRS is critical to what we do because in-building and metro densification need that extra spectrum. And I've been heavily involved with a bunch of the ICD trials in the last few months with customers. And the thing I really want to share with you today is what we're hearing from the end users. CIOs, the CTOs, they've started deploying this, and it's turned from us educating them. They're now teaching us and what the real use cases are and how they see this as this new area of innovation and what it means to them. And it's a critical step towards the 5G networks that we all envision. So look forward to the panel today.
Great, thank you, Kurt. So let's get started here. As you can see, we have an excellent panel. Now, obviously, it depends on me as to what information I can extract from them that kind of makes sense. So, as I said, you guys are aware that so far, telecom has been a play for most of the big operators. So we all know T-Mobile, Sprint, AT&T, Verizon. And in fact, Sprint and T-Mobile are trying to merge. And once that comes through, if you remember Alan's slide, they're going to actually have the majority of the spectrum, combining T-Mobile and Sprint together. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But let's get started. I'm going to, in the interest of our audience here, students and faculty, I know there's a lot of industry folks that are looking at this online, but since this being our first event, we just want to start ground zero and then unfold this slowly over several events. So we're going to step back a little bit, get back to basics. What I have here in terms of representation is CBRS Alliance. I look at you guys as policy, and Fujitsu as service integration, and then I have product folks that will be able to give us an angle, and Jennifer, from a legal angle, some of the use cases that she will be talking about, that's going to be vital. But to begin with, I know Alan gave us a little bit of an introduction about CBRS. So I'm going to just back up and ask a very basic question here. Why CBRS and why now?
So why CBRS? I think, so this is the first opportunity for private or for different use cases on 3GPP standards. So whether it's LTE, whether it's 5G, this is the first opportunity for people to go utilize those base technologies and build business cases and do wacky things or whatever they want to do on it. I think in some respects, we say why now and why, we are really lucky this has happened because, as was said, mid-band spectrum is really, really difficult to get hold of. And it is really good and has been used around the world for 5G. So it's a really good set of spectrum for 5G. So having that in a marketplace like this that would allow people to just go and use it as they need and not have to think about buying it for however many $1 billion it would cost and then go deploy hundreds of thousands of cell sites around the country. I think the fact that that model sort of got broken when we did this, and it opened up to the idea that anybody could have a go at it, even if they wanted to just do it in a small office environment or in their home or wherever it was, all the way up to maybe a municipality wanting to do it. I think that's that was something that was really well thought through at the beginning by the FCC maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I think, where we are today is very much a reflection of what was thought about that time ago. And this was about trying to create innovation here in the United States. And I think, innovation now is as important to the US and the US economy as ever. So I think it's a really good time.
Yeah, it's really kind of a democratization, I think, of a technology that to this point hasn't really been available widely to smaller innovators. So
yeah.
We don't really know what's going to happen once people start mass getting hold of it.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Did you guys have any inputs on that question or?
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'll go ahead. my realization was over the last few months is that this is the Homestead Act for the digital age. The Homestead Act, where the federal government said, here's 160 acres out west, you go out there and farm it and build it, and then you can kind of own it. And CBRS is the same thing. It's just 150 megahertz, not 160 acres, right? And that is something that the end users, private end, didn't know that they could have. We have a site, American Dream, in the northern New Jersey. It's a large complex for retail. Every new system was a headache because I had to figure out how to make it work. We're giving them an HOV lane of connectivity, and when they realized they could have spectrum and actually build and develop on it, that is something they never had before because everything was always in contention. That made them reprioritize their projects. They want to be cutting edge, leading edge. Now that they have this, they own some land. Not to pick on Chris, but if you're under a landlord's tenant system in England and you come over to the U.S., it's the day to pick on Chris.
I know, I'm fully Texan now. I don't know how you could say that.
So it's very American to have this shared where the government's saying, hey, you can have this spectrum, use it, just do something with it. Using it, you got to let somebody else use it.
Well, from my side, I will try to give a slightly different angle. First of all, rather than answering myself, let me report some answers I heard. So I think in one of the first engagements, there was a question coming, say, why CBRS? And the immediate answer was, because it's this share. So, echoing the fact that so far spectrum has been, licensed with a very expensive, the very expensive cost. So this is perceived as a first opportunity really to build something on a shared spectrum, something that is perceived like, okay, it's given. So then in terms of, that doesn't mean, so by the way, that mobile operators are over, or somehow are not considering. So let me give you a different flavor. From mobile to cable to fixed to enterprise. Each of them would have a different answer why CBRS. If you look at the mobile operator, I think they are struggling to improve the end user experience, which today, and you know better than me, is a lot about speed and latency, but speed is one of the things. So they see in CBRS an opportunity to augment, especially in very highly densified urban areas, a possibility to have an additional spectrum in order to reach, to enhance the peak rate, so enhance the throughput, enhance the capacity. So this is one use case. So they are also looking. Doesn't mean that they are going to compete with the other use cases, but this is their own view on the mobile, on the mobility, on the mobile business. If you look at the cable, well, most of the cable are also virtual operators. So they're also looking into the opportunity to have really offloading the network, so to say, rather than having all the traffic managed in a roaming network, basically managing close in proximity of their customers, building a network that is based on a license which is really, well, not on a license, on a spectrum which is affordable, basically. But this, from a product perspective, of course, drives a different type of design, very small cell, all-in-one, strand mount, and so on. So there is also a unique answer from Nokia perspective to product for each use cases. Then, if we move quickly on the fixed, we see the fixed, fixed operator have the first opportunity to go wireless, to invest in wireless, to actually, in areas where they don't have really fixed infrastructure, because it's not really economical, they see an opportunity to use finally a spectrum which is available, which is shared, in order to have the last mile in areas where today there is no broadband opportunity. And of course, there is also an opportunity for them to get access to some government fund, like a Connect American Fund, in trying to provide the coverage in the broadband to the rural. Of course, for that, we believe that the best product for that is really to do something very cheap and very efficient, even if we know that in the market they are looking also in terms of a complex and expensive product as well, what we call massive MIMO. But we believe in Nokia that the best way is really to go cheap, with something that is economically viable, because these are really rural areas. Then, last but not least, like we were saying, enterprise. That's, I think, we can all agree that's the biggest opportunity to have something better than Wi-Fi in terms of coverage, in terms of outdoor coverage, in terms of capacity, especially in terms of contemporary number of users that can be served. So, and we already see that at least the big sectors like utilities, oil and gas, mining, they are moving and considering seriously CBRS as one of the options, spectral option to implement the private networks.
Right. Jennifer, did you have an input into that question?
Sure, Rashmi. I apologize in advance because I'm having a lot of difficulty hearing the other speakers. So I will apologize if I repeat anything that they've said. But I think your question was, why now? Why this band? You know, why is this the right time and why is it exciting?
Yeah, and if you could actually give a perspective internationally as well to international markets, that would be great.
Oh, sure. So I think some of the other speakers may have alluded to the fact that, you know, the governments around the world have been struggling with how to make spectrum available to keep up with demand for mobile and fixed broadband services. The United States is in a particularly difficult position because so much of our spectrum below 10 gigahertz is in fact occupied by government users, specifically military users who absolutely need access to that spectrum when and where their use cases emerge. But the rest of the time, they are not necessarily very efficient in their use. So trying to find a way of getting access to that spectrum, but not putting our military through the long, arduous process of relocating to another band or retrofitting their equipment was a really big objective of trying to find a way to share spectrum. And sharing is not a new thing. I mean, the FCC and its equivalents around the world have, often found ways of implementing sharing, but usually on a more manual, static basis where coordination is, undertaken through one by one with incumbents and new users, trying to make the most of available spectrum and finding ways to design and engineer around one another. I think to your point of why now and why are we seeing this band becoming so exciting is that we have been able to apply cloud-based capability and technology, the price for which has significantly dropped in recent years, to this problem of coordination and sharing, and we're able to do it in real time. Which is really enabling a whole variety of new use cases and enabling folks to understand where spectrum is available in any given location in very short order to help them figure out what spectrum assets are available. So while sharing is nothing new, I think the application of cloud-based technology is really helping to drive sharing to a whole new level. And just like Airbnb or Uber have done for the transportation industry, as well as travel and hospitality, that same capability is being applied now to spectrum management. And I think we're seeing all of the benefits that come along with having access to that kind of information in real time because of what's happening with the cloud. Now, internationally, I think a lot of other countries are very interested in what's going on in the United States and seeing how automated database-driven sharing will work. I think a lot of other countries have had some experience with this in the TV white spaces, which was a great idea in terms of trying to get access to spectrum that was being underutilized. But unfortunately, that market never really quite took off, and I think that was due to a lack of widespread equipment availability and a true ecosystem around the TV white spaces. But in the CBRS band, what we're seeing is worldwide ecosystem for LTE equipment combining with this automated cloud-based capability. And the combination of those two things, I think, is what's really driving the success of CBRS And I think other countries are going to be looking at this capability and this success and figuring out how they can adapt it to the challenges that they're facing, which may not be the same as what we have in the U.S. So, this specific CBRS combination of sharing with the military, sharing with commercial users, and having multiple tiers of new entrants may not be how each country ultimately ends up deploying, dynamic sharing going forward. But I do think that there will be other bands, such as the 6 gigahertz band, for example, that countries may be looking to leverage the same technology to allow new unlicensed services to share with commercial fixed services that are in that band. So we'll see how this plays out, but a lot of countries looking closely at what's going on with CBRS in the U.S. and trying to figure out how to leverage that same capability for frequency bands in their country or region, and how to tailor it to meet their specific requirements and challenges.
Well, thanks, Jennifer. I really like your analogy of comparing this to Uber or Airbnb as a platform, being able to share that spectrum. Now, obviously, with all that I've heard right now, it seems obviously, the first thing in getting communication together, and everybody knows how important communication is today, right? Can anybody here live without their Instagrams or their Facebooks or, I'm told this generation doesn't use Facebooks, maybe TikTok, right? Okay, so we know, what we don't know is the plumbing behind what brings our digital life together. And the most important part about that is spectrum, the frequency at which they can transmit. The T-Mobiles, that's why your phones are either T-Mobile, either Verizon or AT&T. When you walk into an iPhone store, they're going to ask you which operator, because they all transmit at different frequencies. And frequency, just like water, is very valuable because we don't have much available, right? And a frequency that's actually clear. There's no interference on that, and our current infrastructure equipment actually works on that frequency. That is hard to come by. So this is where this story begins. What we know now with the opening of CBRS band, also called the innovation band, is that it's not just the T-Mobile and the Sprints and the AT&Ts. Anybody can become an operator. Anybody can actually host their own network. Now, obviously, you're going to ask, wow, what does that mean? If I'm in the business of hospitality, say I own a hotel, how can I become an operator, and how am I going to go about it, right? What is needed? Obviously this is not our core competency, so how do we go about building our own network? So my next question to these folks is, given these use cases, right? Most of the use cases, you guys are mostly used to working with the operators who are equally technical as you guys are and know all about networks. What about trying to work with the hospitality business, working with small, medium enterprise that's not their core competency and they have no idea? Even setting up Wi-Fi is perplexing for them. So how would you, maybe Ryan could take this question, being the service integrator, how would you bring this and make it more accessible for people to build their own networks using the spectrum?
Yeah, no, I liked your analogy. We're sort of the plumbers of the internet, right? We're putting these networks together. So, and to your point, being that this is a technology that's now becoming available to those who aren't traditional carriers, it won't be part of their core competency. We may be working with, as you mentioned, hospitality, research, education, city governments, and many others who we sort of affectionately refer to as control freaks, right? Like those building city networks, transportation utilities, those who want to control their coverage, security, every device that attaches to the network. So from our perspective, it's really kind of understanding what's the outcome that they're looking for, and trying to help them achieve that vision that they have in mind. Right. Most of when you're talking to an operator, they really want to dive straight into the nuts and bolts and talk speeds and feeds and the technology and the protocols. When you're talking to these other individuals who you're talking about, they don't care about any of that. They just want it to do what they want it to do. So making sure that you understand what that is and guiding them toward something that they're going to be happy with is really sort of the overarching objective. We can bring in solutions architects and to actually build and implement it for them.
Okay, so do you see that this is a space for the operators to step in and help build private LTE networks, or is it the equipment manufacturers such as Nokia and the others? Like, whose role is it? Like, who do they approach, or would they approach CBRS Alliance to be able to get some hand-holding through it?
It's a good question. I think it's a big space, and there are going to be a lot of places where people can go to get help. Carriers are obviously continuing to invest in their existing networks, expanding their coverage, improving their capacity, densifying those networks. So, and as they begin to implement 5G and network slicing, they'll be improving their capabilities in those areas to service some of those customers more individually as well.
Okay, I think you threw out another technical term here called network slicing. Again, we'll hold off on that and we'll come and unfold that in a little bit. So given the use cases, in fact, starting here on our campus, we are having very poor in-building coverage here. You know, we either have, Wi-Fi is the only way, and even Wi-Fi isn't providing adequate coverage, especially because of the size of the campus, the size of the building. How can this improve? Because this is everybody's questions, right? As the moment we walk in through that door, our emails stop updating, messages stop coming in. How will access to CBRS fix that in-building coverage for us?
I can take that as an in-building expert from our company. Is that CBRS, the technology, having that spectrum, we see it as one of two ways of solving it: either mobilizing IT or IT mobilization. And what I mean is that we haven't taken the mobile infrastructure and made it so the IT guy can do it, understand it, and deploy it, make that easy, or the IT such that we've made the mobile infrastructure look like IT. CBRS allows that. One, Jennifer talked about the cloud enablement. So much of this technology being in the cloud. It's all based on existing standards. We've had about a dozen different integrators deploy a bunch of ICD systems. None of them had to go through any retraining. It's a cloud connection to the SaaS. The devices, the core networks are things they already know. And they can make it simplified enough that we can get the deployment in building and coverage and seamless. And as Nokia pointed out, there's a lot of different use cases that from the mobile network operator down to the enterprise use cases and fixed wireless. And there's a broad selection of network infrastructure. As I say, what's on the ground determines what's in the ceiling. If it's grass or dirt, that's fixed wireless macro infrastructure. If it's hard tile or concrete, you have a lot of traffic and probably a lot of different services you want to provide. That's a different type of infrastructure. If you're a carpeted, quiet office space, you might just go with simple access points. And all those technologies exist, and they're really to the point where with CBRS it can deploy. The roadblock in building coverage has always been the spectrum and access to it, because the national carriers want to control it, and it's their name on the phone, so they want to make sure it's of a certain quality. But that's big. It hasn't been mobilized or IT enabled. CBRS is doing that, and the 150 companies that are in the CBRS Alliance, I did a count the other day. We're working with 80 of them. that we have some sort of engagement with, but the end user doesn't know that. He doesn't need to know that. All they know is they're getting the service. And we're actually there today in doing this. Our biggest problem is enterprises and end users knowing that they can go get that Homestead Act of 150 megahertz today. They haven't gone west, young man, yet, and they're just about to.
I think, Rashmi, you touched a good point about the enterprise and the skill, the technical skill. This is an important factor for a network infrastructure vendor like Nokia. We say that we create the technology to connect the world. Doing this for enterprise, which is a new space in that respect on the wireless business as well for us, we prioritize what we call digital automation. So we develop, for example, a product which is called Nokia Digital Automation Cloud. It is exactly aimed at making the installation of a private network very easy, meaning that we ship box with a small cell with a base station installed somewhere, and it's connected, power, Ethernet, and you have to do nothing. The rest is done in cloud automatically by means of software. So this type of automation is important when, it's one of the key prerequisites or requirements in order to enable the business, especially making the life easy for the end.
Okay. So does that mean that anybody could walk into Best Buy and just like picking up a router, they could pick up your small cells and start building a network at home?
Not yet, because CBRS has just started, but maybe, who knows?
That's where we should be heading.
Exactly, because
right?
it's a shared spectrum. Typically in the license band, this doesn't happen because it goes through the operator. In the CBRS, happen.
That's good. Yes,
No,
Chris.
so just a thought though. So the first thing everybody talks about is consumer, okay, about whether you can come into a building and you get coverage or not. And without doubt, that's clearly something that has to get fixed. But I'd argue that at the moment people pay $50 a month or whatever it is, and it's difficult to figure out how you're going to make a ton of money out of the consumer going forward. And when you talk about 5G, because this really is about heading towards 5G, whenever we think about 5G and the GDP impact that 5G can have on an economy, it's got to go into industrial, enterprise, those types of use cases, because it's got to create something where there's a cash sum or whatever, there's money there that can get generated. I think the problem here is that we keep that necessarily because everybody sees what happens when they move into a building or whatever it is, or maybe they do want to build their own network. It's very consumer focused, and there's a piece that people talk about the fact that when it comes to 5G, you can only see a cat play a piano at a certain speed for it to be funny. It doesn't matter if it goes faster or faster than that. It really won't be any different. And I think that's the part that I think that is really interesting, is what happens about creating that opportunity. And just to say something about the operators, because I think if you look at what AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile and Sprint are doing, they are looking at how to do that. They aren't just looking at how to create a better experience for the consumer. They really are looking at how you get into industry and create opportunities for them. So, I mean, my hope is that what's going to happen is you'll see not the AT&T, the Verizons, you'll see whoever it is, other operators that maybe we've never heard of, try and create networks that in that space and trying to create an outcome in that space. But I do think that is where we hope that there's going to be a lot more innovation and a lot more sort of drive in the economy.
Right. So in the in-building coverage, I mean, and this was on one of the Federated Wireless slides, the gap in coverage in hospitals, on campuses like this one, big industrial factories, locations like that. It's pretty significant. And basically there is revenue there that is not materializing, because as soon as we hand off to Wi-Fi, that's not a monetization path the operators can take. But given these use cases, Chris touched upon a good point here. Apparently, the estimated GDP impact of CBRS is well over $10 billion in the next few years. Where do you think this impact will come from? You mentioned industry and enterprise, but is that all, or are we looking at something else as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so fundamentally what I hope happens is the CBRS to me was about us creating a set of tools that allow people to go off and do something with it. It wasn't just about spectrum, because everybody gets hung up about spectrum, but the truth is you can put spectrum in the market, and if you don't give them an opportunity where there's equipment that they can buy, and there's a lot of equipment you can buy, and not just from one guy. There's a series of end user devices that you can buy. There's services you can buy. There are people who are thinking about how to do things over the top on it. Unless all that happens, then it sort of goes a bit flat, and I think that's happened in the past. So my real hope was that what we do is we create all the tools and try and let people know that they were there and see what happened. And you know, really early on, I used to do these. There was a guy out of Google who's actually one of the other founders of the Alliance. We used to go around and talk about the opportunity or what it meant. And he used the words democratization of LTE a lot. He used the words blowing up all sorts of industries that really upset people, but which is sort of a Google thing. But in reality, you know, that's a little bit of it, isn't it? It's not necessarily about us constraining and saying this is what's got to happen, but it's about creating an opportunity for things that we all didn't know would happen. I mean, how many of us thought YouTube would happen? You know, and those sorts of things, I think, anything like that does occur, I think that's just a really big bonus from what we're doing on CBRS.
Right, and that's what we are looking for. We are looking for those killer applications that will make this happen. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So, so tell me this: like compared to the cost of putting Wi-Fi in, how would somebody go around? I mean, if an enterprise wants to convert to fixed wireless access, which is a term that's used for in-building coverage, what is the cost comparison between Wi-Fi per square foot versus CBRS per square foot?
It depends. So, unfortunately, there's been industry analysts that have looked at this problem, and in terms of in-building, you know, a few channels. Remember, CBRS has 150 megahertz, and you could just use one or two 10 megahertz channels, and there they've shown kind of break even, maybe a little bit more. But what you're getting with that is you're getting security. You're getting basically 5G-like latencies, and you're getting some ownership. So, but then when you start adding the additional capacity and you're able to do multiple services, whether it's for consumer phones or private enterprise use, industrial use cases that you can use on the exact same infrastructure, and do a kind of a network slicing, even though we haven't talked about that yet, then the economics get to be fundamentally transformed. I talked about this, one of our early customers, American Dream. There's a video online, you can look at it. They're very public about their cost savings. 600 acres to cover all their parking, 33,000 parking spaces. To get the connector traffic management system, their use case and problem was they opened just a couple weeks ago, their traffic management system to come in and out, connecting all the digital displays, so the ingress egress out of the facility. And the site had been there a long time. They needed to connect them up with networks. They looked at Wi-Fi. They looked at doing fiber. And then we brought CBRS to them in July. They brought this problem, and they were opening in October. They saved 80 to 90% of the cost. And rather than employing 6 to 9 months with the other solutions, we did it in 2 months. We were very hopeful that the ICDs happened on time. But the technology is such that there's commodity components, there's people that know how to do it, and the coverage we get. We did that with around 9 radios and a dozen antennas, covered a huge piece of real estate, and now they've connected. That was for one use case. Now that's the customer that's like, wow, I now have an asset, which is the spectrum I never knew I could have before, and now they're rolling off with use cases they're bringing to us. And that's, to me, that's victory, because when us OEMs or service providers, technology people are telling the customer use cases, that's uphill. When the customer is coming back to us with things they want to do with the infrastructure, that's to the point we're at right now, which is very, very exciting.
I see. So what about the PAL? Alan talked about the licensing. When do you think that that's going to be auctioned? And I know it's done in 10 megahertz bands. And how expensive could that auction get? And do you think the operators would be interested in getting those as well?
Probably should give Jennifer.
It's a good one for Jennifer.
Yes,
All right,
I think
okay.
Jennifer.
Okay.
I think Jennifer
Put her
ought
on
to
the
have
hook for it.
a shot. She hasn't had a shot of many of these.
Jennifer, did you get that question?
Yes, so the FCC has scheduled the PAL auction for the end of June of 2020. And I think, yes, there will be operators who are going to be participating in that auction. I think there may be cable providers that are going to be participating. And it will also be interesting to see how the other folks who are deploying private networks today on the GAA spectrum, how they decide to participate, and if they do. I think they're going to get a lot of important information over the next 6 to 7 months about how this spectrum is going to be utilized, how many others are going to be vying for access to spectrum in their particular geographies, and how much spectrum they're going to need to support their specific use cases. And that will be telling for a lot of folks about whether or not participating in the auction and acquiring one or more PALs will be helpful for them. I also believe that there will be folks who are planning to participate in the PAL auctions, but not necessarily deploy right away, but lease that capacity to others who are using spectrum in that band. So there may be folks who are not necessarily planning to operate in the band themselves, but are going to take advantage of the accelerated real-time leasing capability that the FCC has enabled for the PALs by allowing SaaSes such as Federated Wireless to significantly speed up the process and for leasing and creating a secondary market for spectrum. So rather than having to wait months for the FCC to approve individual lease applications, we're going to be able to implement them in near real time. So that's going to be an interesting aspect for folks who are going to participate in the PAL auction as well.
I see. Well, thank you so much, though. We have a lot of questions. I have an entire, I don't know how many questions I have. I don't even know whether I can get to the end of this. But we are going to continue to unfold this and keep asking the questions that we have to ask to understand this better. But I would like to kind of take this time and open up to Q&A to see if anybody has a question that the speakers here could answer, or for Alan.
Band that's going to become available. What's that going to do to the digital divide between the rural community and the urban densification that we are trying to accomplish with the millimeter waves?
Yeah. So I think the digital divide. So first off, to my mind, the digital divide is not just a spectrum issue. I mean, it's an issue of affordability of putting the networks out there. And I know that the US government continues to understand how that can be bridged. I think that CBRS in some respects helps because what it does is it provides, as I say, it provides spectrum that's supported by equipment and a lot of different manufacturers. So you get the competitive forces in there that maybe drives the prices down. I must admit, I've spent some time with operators that struggle with exactly that problem, and I think that this is only part of the answer, and there's other pieces that have to get addressed. But I do think this is a heck of a start, creating this opportunity, the bigger chunk of spectrum and an ecosystem that's so broad that you've got competitiveness within it that's going to drive sort of costs down. I think that's a good start. Yeah.
Are there any specific policies in place to encourage, the division to be smaller and smaller?
Well, so fundamentally, the policy that was put in was the GAA, which meant that you don't have to pay for the spectrum. If no one turns up and no one wants to buy a PAL, you get access to whatever you want in that 150. And the fact is that the places that we're talking about, that's exactly what happens. People don't turn up. So I do think there is an abundance of opportunity in terms of spectrum, just because as long as you can get a contract with the SaaS vendor, you can go get at that spectrum as GAA and use it all day.
Yeah, I will add to that there's actually already a market for that for the WISP community.
Yeah.
That are the incumbents that'll be coming over to this, and we believe that there's going to be even a proliferation of more the wireless internet service providers, which generally are very small, 2, 3, 5 people that are servicing a community to provide connectivity, and that's the best way. So the market is already kind of there and proven, and that'll, I think, accelerate. And CBRS really, I think, is going to go from two ends of it provides a very low cost last mile connectivity, and it's very good when you have high density venues where you're congested. If you're somewhere in the middle, the economics probably aren't as attractive. But on either end of the scale, that CBRS is where we're seeing the most amount of demand.
Okay. I think we have more folks here to ask questions.
Hi, yes. My name is Carlos Jong. I'm in ITSS 300. Actually, she's my professor, by the way. So, kind of questions.
That's how you got there.
Extra credit.
It's an assignment. All right, so I keep hearing that 5G will require millions of cells. Like, why is that? And silence.
Who wants to take that?
I can. Well,
Yeah.
It depends. It depends what frequency you're at. If you're at the real high frequencies, you can go a short distance. It's going to require a lot. What we didn't really talk too much about is that this mid-band CBRS can support 5G. The standards, as Alan talked about earlier, are underway. We also talked about this is all moving towards software, so we can software enable the 4G infrastructure with CBRS, the 5G, with no change of hardware. And you can do 5G on low band spectrums. One of the advantages of 5G is it's based on the new cloud infrastructure. There's energy savings, there's operational cost savings, reasons to deploy 5G more than just what you kind of hear from the marketing engines right now. The 5G, if you're doing high spectrum, yes, you'll need more densification, but there's benefits to 5G that can be evolved in the low and mid bands today. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Nokia probably.
Yeah, I have maybe a couple of different angles to this. So maybe let's start with the business one, because we are in a business school. So also touching a little bit the millimeter wave, right? So 5G is going to be deployed in a different type of frequency bands. First of all, this is already happening across the world. In US, all the launches has been on the millimeter wave, has been in Europe. There is a reason why it's been in a dense urban environment, because this is where you have, from a total cost of ownership and business case, something viable. If you consider at the extreme rural coverage with the millimeter wave, that would be really challenging. It would be very costly because of the because of the spectrum, the propagation. You don't have a very large coverage area. you have challenges with the vegetation, even for anything can be an obstacle to the signal. So basically, from a business perspective, it really depends CBRS versus millimeter wave and 5G versus 4G as well. It's another dimension. It really pretty much depends on the type of coverage you want to have and what type of opportunity you want to build as a new sort of, let's imagine to use CBRS as a new CBRS, business owner. Now, when it goes to the number of size, small cell, et cetera, for CBRS, I think, in that respect, CBRS, compared to the other technology, has the advantage to be in a spectrum that is deployed worldwide, where 5G is deployed worldwide. So 5G is deployed on a 3.5 gigahertz spectrum in Korea, in China, in Europe, and also, of course, also in Canada. There is an auction coming next year. So 3.5 gigahertz is definitely, so that is where the CBRS spectrum sits. You have the advantage of having the whole ecosystem available, meaning that infrastructure vendor, we do have product. Yeah, we don't need a scale for CBRS business case to build that product. We need just a little bit of adaptation. Devices, that is even more important. They are looking into the really global scale before releasing any CPE or any mobile hotspot or any smartphone. So there is an ecosystem, just because it sits on a spectrum where there are devices that support both technology, TD-LTE, so 4G, or 5G. So in that respect, also on the technology angle, the CBRS has the promise to deliver interesting, new use cases, and in every new use case, just because you have the whole ecosystem already available.
So the iPhone 11, there's a dual SIM that's available in iPhone 11, and it does support that frequency, 3.5
Yeah, this is what
gigahertz?
they have said. It
Okay.
supports the band 48, so the CBRS. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I know we have a big queue of questions. If you could quickly ask the
Punchy.
question.
And we'll be punchy with the answers, eh?
I do want them to be able to ask questions.
Yeah, sure.
Just for a better grade.
Go.
So go ahead. But we'll try to briefly answer as soon as possible. Yeah.
Okay, hello, my name is Joshua Judge. I'm in an ITSS 3300 class as well. The question that I have, though, is Jennifer spoke briefly about how a large majority of the 10 gigahertz and below is already being utilized by the government. And because the Navy is already an incumbent in this 3.5 gigahertz of the CBRS, is there a concern, or are there any plans in place for, in the event that this section becomes monopolized by the Navy, and where do you go from there?
Maybe I can answer that quickly. So the use cases in the band were defined by the Department of Defense came out and declared the use cases. They don't have to declare the actual use case, but they have to declare where it is and what they're using for. In general, the band was fairly lightly used. That's why it was picked, because an aircraft carrier doesn't turn up on the coast and start flight ops every week. It's both lightly used in time and lightly used geography. So now that we've done this, now that we've set this up, the DoD are keen not to go pollute the band further. They actually want this to work, and they've worked with us right from the start. And kudos to them. They've had to do certain things to make sure this all functioned, but they have been a very willing partner. So I think that's not really the sort of thing I think anybody should worry about. They want this to succeed as much as we do.
Hello, my name is also Joshua. I'm in Professor Varma's second section of her ITSS class. My question is, how will you guys deal with competition from the larger players on the implementation of 5G? For example, what if they bought several of the PAL auctions in the CBRS range?
Great question.
5G.
I say don't fear the PAL. That
if someone's buying and investing in the PAL, first of all, only if they're actively broadcasting does they actually get it's a use it or share it model, so that's good. So that doesn't mean you're gonna lose it if they buy it for a county, they only use it in half the county, the other half isn't using it. So that point. The other is if they're making that investment to purchase it and own it, then there's value to it. And if you've deployed it, then there may be value in you having infrastructure that will support that spectrum. And the more that this spectrum is used, I think the more that there's going to be incentive from the government to actually offer up more shared spectrum. So if this isn't used, then this is going to be what it is. I encourage the PAL to happen, and I think it's going to be a huge business opportunity on both sides, for the operators and for the enterprise user.
To add to that real quickly, I believe there are 15 channels available in the band, and only 7 of those are going to be available for PALs, correct? So
Yep.
that leaves 8 for general use.
Plus, like I said at the beginning, there are really different business cases, which means also geographical area covered by this spectrum, where it is using 4G and 5G, by different players, even the big one, right? We said mobile operators or cable or fixed. There is a spatial differentiation. So these are different geographical area. When I said if you are a mobile business owner and you want to boost the peak rate, you go really in the dense, in a very densified area, very urban, right? If you think about, instead enabling, sort of households, whether fixed to wireless or whether it is, strength mount type of installation, then you go in a different area, right? More suburban, etc. If you think about rural, then it's so we believe as well there is a space just because we have so much geographical space and so many channels available. That even if a PAL will be licensed, like I said, they have priority. But if in a certain moment nobody's using, it's still available for everybody else in the GAA. So the SAS will be able to allocate dynamically the band.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hello, panel. Thank you for coming out today. My name is Derek, and I'm in ITSS 3300, the second section. My question is, for most of us, networks and spectrums are a very abstract idea since they're intangible. My question, I guess, is for you guys who are in this industry, what future or innovations do you guys see occurring or would want to see occurring or like you dreamt of occurring as a result of this new band opening up for the general public?
Thanks for asking. I would like maybe to go first if I can.
Yeah, but I think in the interest of time, we haven't even started. We haven't even scratched the surface here. We haven't talked about the use cases. We haven't talked about the aspect of PAL and how it should be utilized. I think we'll have yet another event that basically goes in depth about use cases. Today was just an introductory thing, but that's a great question though. But I don't think that we can quickly answer that.
I tried to be.
Alessandro was about to give you 15 minutes of how that
I will try to
out.
answer like I would do to my daughter or anybody.
No, so we need to bring these folks back to be able to get more information on this. But
and especially when compared to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is more like, the way I see it, more consumer, more connectivity only. When you start building technology like LTE, you gain advantage of a lot of features already available to differentiate traffic priority and to build something on top. So if you can differentiate services and that have different requirements, so this is the most important, what you can build on top of the network. So far we have just discussed the network. I agree with you, it's very abstract concept. Once you build it, what can you do with it? So the technology brings a lot of functionality that enable you to monetize in a different way or separate category of users. So the capability compared to a Wi-Fi is really immense. It's a totally different story. And when you take the angle that you can plug in artificial intelligence in it, for example, if you connect a surveillance camera, you use the connectivity you have video analytics over there, so you have machine learning algorithms. The capability that you enable are immense. This is just one example, right? If you attach then the camera to a drone, you have another use case, right? So
this is what is happening today in terms of technology in various angles. So I think the creativity is very wide, what you can bring together in terms of solution. But I agree with you, network is abstract. You need to build something on top to generate the business.
Right. That's a great answer, Alessandro. So the main thing is, it's not just the use cases, it's the business models. That's also waiting to be innovated upon.
Yep.
So how are we going to monetize some of these things? That's also, that's a big discussion, yes.
My name's Timothy Graham. I'm also in Professor Varma's ITSS 3300. I've seen the claim that some research has shown 5G has the potential to have a physical effect on the human body. Is there any actual evidence of that, or is it just fear of innovation?
I think...
That's Jennifer, obviously. Needs to answer that one.
I had a professor, this was a long time ago, when wireless communication first started, and he used to say that the most dangerous thing we do today is get into a car and drive. Before wireless, does anything to you, you might be in a car accident. That the frequency of that probability is much higher. But Jennifer, did you have a comment on that?
I didn't mean to throw her under the bus like that. That's a horrible question to...
I apologize. I could not hear the question.
Then you're good.
Okay. I think in the interest of time, we should move on. But thank you for that question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and my question is, Rashmi's from our class, ITSS, and my question is, what problem may occur if you are using old spectrum like 2G, 3G, 4G for spectrum 5G? Like, what problems may occur if you use the old one?
Well, it's all about the speed, right? Today, you stream Netflix over 4G. I'm sure you're watching the shows on your phone, not on a television. So obviously going 3G, 2G, those are older technologies, cannot support the new applications that are in the market with those speeds.
Well, maybe just on the question about support. The one thing about CBRS is, unlike other bands, CBRS is going to have to support LTE and 5G at the same time in something called coexistence. And that actually is not a trivial issue. And it is something that in the Alliance we're working hard on. But if you look at what most carriers do, they separate out what their spectrum does. So they have spectrum that still runs 3G, although they're migrating off of it. They have spectrum that will run 4G, and they have spectrum that will run 5G. In this case, the spectrum actually will run, it'll run 4G, it'll run 5G. The actual rules of the spectrum say you can run whatever you want on it. So although the Alliance pushes the whole CBRS, the Alliance pushes the idea of 3GPP-based technologies, the 4G, 5G. The truth is that you could actually run anything you want. So this band has to try and accommodate all of that, and that's what the system, that's what the SASCOT operators have to do, is that they have to try and create a system or an envelope for everybody to operate in.
Okay, I think I got that. I didn't really get that question, but thank you for that answer. Thanks, Chris.
Hello, my name is Sahil Jawani, and I'm in Professor Varma's ITSS class. So I was basically wondering if you could go into more depth about the auctions that's going to happen next June, and who's allowed to participate in that.
I think we could take that as a question for the next event, because that's probably going to, I'm sorry, but we are completely running out of time here, and I know my crew there is sitting there and saying, okay, we're passed.
Done.
Yeah.
We're done.
Well, but thank you, that's a great question.
But
And that should possibly open our next event and talk on this. Thank
because
you.
that would have been a brilliant one for Jennifer as well.
Yeah. Very quickly, if you could ask your question.
Okay. Hi, my name is Pratisha. I'm also in Professor Varma's ITSS class. Actually, I had a similar question about obstacle. With GAI, no one has to pay for access and anyone can become an operator. But what are some of disadvantages to GAI?
So just firstly, you have to have a contract with the SaaS operator, which is not free, okay? Or at least I haven't seen anybody give it for free. So you do have to operate underneath the SaaS and have a connection to that, and that's a business transaction that you'd have to do. I think in terms of GAA operation, it depends where you are. If you're in a really congested area, okay, the fact is that you have to coexist with everybody that's coming in. So the more people that keep plowing in, the more the SaaSes have to work to ensure everybody coexists. Because this is not like unlicensed. This is not like Wi-Fi where everybody has a go. It's a shoot first and you get on. This is a managed situation. The SaaSes create that, and they have to coordinate everybody. And so I think on the GAA, the issue is that if you were to go to Times Square and say you want to operate there, and everybody wants to put a network in there, you can see that it's going to get congested. And you might want to buy a PAL at that point to create a service that you really want to stand up. But if you've only got GAA, I think you'd have to be realistic that you may see a lot of people try and turn up at the same place.
Okay, so sorry.
No, I was going to say, but if you're in the cornfields of Iowa, right, not many people are likely to turn up, in which case GAA may be absolutely fantastic for you.
So why do you say GAA is free and anyone can access it when you have to pay for a SaaS?
Because when they talk about it being free, generally the way Spectrum has been available to people is that the FCC would go through a play where they cleared whatever was in the existing band, they would auction it, and people would turn up and bid. And the auction prices for Spectrum are through the roof. I mean, billions to be able to buy Spectrum. So in this case, you don't have to buy the Spectrum. You can go and operate in it. But you can't just go and operate without any supervision, any control. The SaaS is the thing that was designated to do that. So you do have to have that relationship with the SaaS. But when people talk about it being free, it's because you don't actually buy the Spectrum. You don't have to go out and pay however many billions or $2, whatever it is, a megahertz pop that you pay for some of the other Spectrum that's been out there.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Last question.
My name is Pallavi, and I'm not under. Actually, I'm here master's student and ex-Nokia employee. So
Okay, very good.
my question is that is 4G backbone and 5G backbone is same or they are separated? Like, it's
You
different.
mean the core?
Yeah.
The core
Yeah,
infrastructure,
yeah,
4G, 5G.
Right, and you mean for CBRS in
Yes,
particular? Well, it depends. In terms of products, nothing changes, right? So in terms of protocol, yes, there are differences in the software. Today is all software defined in that respect. So I don't know if I answered that question, but the 5G itself might bring a little bit more requirements because enable more higher throughput. Depends on the bandwidth, but in general may put some additional requirements on the transport in terms of dimensioning. But in terms of technology and products, we don't see, as soon as the 5G can be enabled in the infrastructure once the CBRS network is built on with LTE.
Okay, I have one more question.
Yeah.
Is there any relationship between 5G and Wi-Fi, or how it is like?
In what
in
sense?
terms of speed?
In the term of speed, yeah.
Well, I'm just basing on the launches of the operators, right? And as you can see, there were a lot of analysts, of course, and journalists curious, and they measured the network. And you saw speed in the, with 5G enabled on the millimeter wave up to 1.7 gigabit per second. So, I think it is a difference with the existing technology, even if Wi-Fi is evolving as well. So, but as of today, I think in the wireless world, full mobility, this is a really big achievement. It's just really a magic leap toward the future.
So I think that brings up a good point. I mean, would that mean that Wi-Fi, this is the end of the road for Wi-Fi? 5G, I mean, I know Wi-Fi is trying to also get to greater speeds, but with 5G fixed wireless access available, would Wi-Fi eventually phase out?
No.
I think nobody can answer, right?
Yeah, right. But the enterprise users, they want all the tools in the toolbox for Spectrum, and Wi-Fi has its advantages. The cellular networks aren't going to go away in the license model and the carriers. This is just another tool. This is what I'm hearing from customers. It has value. It's like an HOV lane. You're not going to get rid of the other lanes. This is just an HOV lane of traffic that they can control and manage, and kind of have ownership, and it solves particular use cases.
There is always a cost associated behind Wi-Fi, behind 5G, depending on the use case. And now we talked at the beginning in-building coverage. In-building coverage historically has been the main challenge from an economical perspective for any operator to build, to do the business case right. So with 2G, it didn't work out. So there were a lot of attempts in GSM to put GSM inside indoor coverage. There was no business case. It didn't work out. In 3G, the same. 4G is actually starting to make sense sometimes where you have a large environment. But again, there is a cost associated compared to Wi-Fi. So it really depends. You have to balance. You have to simulate on the environment and see what is cost less and what are pros and cons of both scenarios. But taking the building, which is the most challenging for a wireless business where this technology that you are mentioning are typically used, over Wi-Fi, has been a challenge and probably will remain. Also 5G, it has to be studied carefully. It's really like, it's a business case. You need to run the business case, and there are different costs associated depending on what you want to do it. Like I said, depending also, if you do a business case just for the network infrastructure is one thing. If you include in the business case what type of revenue can you generate on the service that run on it, it's a different story. So this can make the difference.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you. I thank everybody here in the panel. Alan, thanks a lot. Appreciate you guys being here. I think we talked a lot of basic stuff, but it was a good introduction. I think we learned more. It's becoming a little more clear as to how this will proceed in progress. We will be on the lookout for more news on CBRS. And obviously, we do plan to host more events similar to this one. And we can do a deep dive event the next time with having the venue for a longer amount of time. But thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Really appreciate you connecting remotely. And thanks for your patience, though.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would also like to thank the University of Texas Dallas Business School, Jindal School of Management for helping us out with this event. I just ran into Dr. Hassan Berkul, the Dean of the Business School here, and he was very proud to see cutting edge, events like this happening here on campus. So thank you, UTD, and thank you, Asterisk, for helping us put this production through. And thanks for taking care of our overtime. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.